My name is Jackson Slacker.
And my name is Tabitha Kirsten, and we're the co-hosts of the Economics Club podcast.
Today, we met with the COO and President of Equibase, Kyle McDoniel.
We talked about his career, what led him to Equibase, the ins and outs of the business, and of course, the latest Econ Games.
For those of you who don't know, the Econ Games are a 24-hour data analytics-driven challenge where the sponsor presents a problem to students to solve.
Before we get into the interview, we have a short disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the parties involved and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the University of Southern Indiana.
This content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.
Now we have our interview.
Hi all, this is our very first episode of our podcast series for the Economics Club at USI. I'm Jackson Slagley, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Tabitha Kirsten.
Hello, I'm the president of the Econ Club, and we're here in Lexington, Kentucky at the Equibase headquarters speaking with the president of Equibase. And just recently, their company sponsored the latest Econ Games that was held at the University of Kentucky. So why don't you introduce yourself, what your company does, and what your role is in the company?
Absolutely. So, hey, Tabitha. Hey, Jackson. Glad to be here with you today, and certainly had a great time at the Econ Games a few weeks ago, and we got a lot of great ideas and a lot of great input. So, something we look forward to continuing to be involved with. But I'm Kyle McDoniel, so I oversee Equibase. I'm the president and COO, and we are the official database for thoroughbred racing in North America. So, United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico, and so we are responsible for gathering all the data from every race that happens. And last year, that was over 40,000 races. We also gathered the workout data from the horses. There were over 500,000 workouts that we gathered over the past year. And so we have a large team that manages all that data, gathers all that data, and then helps us figure out what to do with that data. And so there's never a not interesting day.
Okay. So, and you're the CEO of the company.
That's right.
So what do you do day to day?
So day to day, I really oversee the overall strategy of the business. I report to a board that's made up of members of the Jockey Club and then the Thoroughbred Racing Associations, which is a consortium of all the major tracks. And so, and if you look at the board that oversees Equibase, it's really, I think 11 of the 12 are either, senior track management or have served on boards at some of the major tracks. And so we really represent the data that gets created at the tracks sort of on behalf of the industry. Which is really, that's our primary customer. And so we're really looking to find what are the things we can do to help support the tracks, the racing industry, and then most importantly, present data in a way that it's interesting for fans and new fans. And so people are able to come to the races and have a great time.
Okay, so we're going to start off with your career. You started off, I believe, at the University of Arkansas.
That's correct.
And you got a Bachelor of Arts degree in writing and journalism.
That's right.
And so kind of an unconventional start to managing data analytics and statistics and working in the sports industry. So what inspired you to pursue journalism academically, and how have those skills you learned in your journalism background transferred to what you do now?
So it all goes back to a love of sports. Ever since I was a little kid, I have loved sports, whether it's baseball, college basketball, horse racing. That was really, a constant source of interest for me. And so, would grow up obviously reading the newspaper, and the sports section was typically the most read part of that. And so, as I started my academic career and started learning about different things and kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, it really felt like sports writing and being involved in sports would be great. At the same time, I was always a computer kid. Had a Commodore 64 and learned to program in BASIC, and certainly was a different time. Things I could have never envisioned some of the things that that are happening today. But fortunately, it's kind of my continued interest in computers and technology, coupled with my interest in sports, really kind of got me on the path here. Interestingly enough, I started my first job in journalism was at the biggest paper in Arkansas at the time, the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and I had a job on sort of the news desk, just as the very entry level, writing obituaries, doing fact checking, like all the stuff that nobody else really wants to do. And it became clear to me that it was going to take a long time at that organization to work my way up and really kind of start doing some of the things I wanted to do. And at the same time, I had an opportunity to come up to be the sports editor at a very small daily newspaper at a small town in Arkansas. And so I decided to take that job. I think I covered, over the course of a few years, covered sporting events and went to all of the 75 counties in Arkansas. And so I was very, very well traveled in the state. And then just continued to work at different newspapers and kind of work my way up, and then ended up at a newspaper called the Benton County Daily Record, which was in Bentonville, Arkansas, where it's the home of Walmart and J.B. Hunt, and very close to the University of Arkansas, where I'd gone to school, and I was able to cover some of the sports at the university. So, really excited to be able to do that as a young person, kind of starting out in my career, and just had the chance to learn a lot. And then that all came about around the same time that the consumer internet really started to flourish. And so, obviously, you guys won't even remember any of this, but really kind of the first way that a lot of people got to the internet was through AOL and a sort of a closed environment, walled garden sort of situation, and then it kind of obviously started to move into the internet we see today. And so at that newspaper, you would go out, cover an event, or at the time I was the sports editor, so other people would go out and cover events, bring everything back, and we would lay out the newspaper and get it out about 11:30 at night. And it was stressful. It was a lot of fun, but a lot of things coming together at once. And so we would get we would get finished with the newspaper and sort of all hyped up and not really ready to go to bed. And so I started kind of learning to teach myself HTML and how to build websites and web pages, and I built one for the newspaper as a hobby. And it started gaining some traction. And so I went to the publisher of the newspaper and I said, "Hey, I think I can make a business out of this." And I think it was maybe one of the first 50 newspaper websites in the country. So fairly early on, but I was the ad sales person, I was the content person, I was the technology person. It was a one-man band, and I don't think I could ever do that today because things have certainly gotten a lot more sophisticated. But it really did, from a educational standpoint, put me in a position to really learn every aspect of the business and how things fit together, and was just a lot of great lessons. And so that's really how I got started and sort of transitioned from being in the newspaper business and writing. And you asked earlier about how does sort of my educational career or education at the University of Arkansas, when I really was studying English, journalism, writing, it's just helped me be a better communicator, right? And when in this, everybody communicates via email, written documents, everything is being able to sell your ideas and being able to get people interested in what you're doing. And so being a good writer and being able to be direct and succinct and persuasive all make a difference. And so I think that's really the key thing probably that I took from that. But that's really what got me kind of on this path to technology. After that, then I really was sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I sent a resume on a whim to ESPN.com because I thought that would be my dream job. And so, they called, and I flew out to Seattle. At the time, it was all the ESPN and ABC digital properties were run by a startup that was founded by Paul Allen of Microsoft fame. And so I took the job, obviously, and got to work on a lot of great projects during my time at ESPN. And it spent about 5 years in Seattle. Then the startup we were at was acquired by Disney, which obviously owned ESPN and ABC at the time. And so we spent a few more years in Seattle, and then I transferred to Bristol, Connecticut, to the headquarters there.
Well, that kind of covers the next section. I was going to say you've had a career focused around sports. I mean, the earliest we found, I mean, just doing our pre-research was looking at your work at ESPN. You were senior director of business development and strategy for 8 years before moving to Fox. Is this kind of the same start as just sending in on a whim to ESPN.com? Did you just move up through the chains, or was that the job you applied for?
So when I started at ESPN, we were actually also doing the websites for a number of the different sports leagues. So we did MLB.com, NBA.com, NASCAR.com. Given my Arkansas upbringing and Southern accent, they assumed that I knew something about NASCAR, so I started there. The secret is I didn't really know very much about NASCAR. At the same time, it was pretty easy to figure out, right? And I think the key thing about that I learned there that I think applies to kind of what I'm doing today is it's really all about the personalities and the stories. And when you're looking at the cars going around on the track, it's really, unless you're a real expert, hard to discern kind of the differences and exactly what's going on. But what makes it fun to follow are the people that you get excited about, right? The people that you care about, the spectacle of it, the smells and the sights, and so that certainly translates to horse racing as well. But when I was at ESPN, I also ran the fantasy games group there. I ran ESPN Insider, which was kind of the first subscription product. We were able to do, I think, the first streaming event on ESPN.com, which was a college football game that took a lot of convincing to a lot of people to get us to be able to do that. But and you look at how much streaming happens today and the quality of it, and it's a completely different universe. But it really it was a lot of fun to be in those early days working on fantasy games. And my to this day, my ESPN fantasy football league is still league ID number 1. And so I can't give that one up. But yeah, it was a great opportunity both to work with a lot of incredible people and really build a network. I think the other key thing was the people that I worked with on the different league properties, NFL.com, NBA.com, NASCAR. I was able to get to know a lot of the people that were working at those leagues at the time, and I've continued to, have those relationships, and as a result, have seen lots of interesting opportunities to come out of that.
Yeah, so I kind of have a follow-up with that one. Sorry, that's honestly amazing career. I think most people find that amazing to start out like that.
There was a lot of luck involved too, but
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate enough actually at USI to work for our ESPN crew. I still do. I will till I graduate, maybe even after if I can. I just do camera crew, a little bit of the editing side. How have you ever thought about that career? Have you done anything with that where, hopping on the camera, do a little bit of commentating, that sort of work?
I've always been more of a behind the scenes person. Early on, once again, kind of when you were, touching everything, I did a decent amount of video editing. Never really aspired to be sort of on air talent or anything like that, but certainly have gotten to interact with a lot of the a lot of folks both at ESPN and Fox. It's always fun to get to spend some time with people who have kind of gone that route, and you definitely work with people who are you can tell they're just real professionals at their craft.
So it sounds like earlier in your career you took a lot of initiative yourself, and that seems like that's what allowed you to move up in the ranks of Fox.
I think so, and I think that, a lot of it was being able to sort of try and see what's next, and being willing to try new things and look at new technologies, and I think that's definitely made a difference.
So this brings us to Equibase. So you've worked, it looks like, in New York, in Los Angeles, and now you're in Lexington, Kentucky, working for horse racing industry. So what brought you to Lexington 3 years ago in 2023?
Yeah, so I had been, after I'd left ESPN, I then spent a long time at Fox Sports, where I got to work on a lot of incredible projects there as well, the U.S. Open Golf Tournament, NFL, NASCAR, you name it. And so that was really an enjoyable time, and really focused more then on kind of the business side of things, and more business development and less kind of technical production or product development, but still like to keep my hands in all those to the best extent that I can. And so eventually over time, as the PASPA was repealed, which was basically the ruling that allowed sports betting to start opening up in the United States. I did a big strategy project over in the UK to really understand how those different betting businesses had evolved over time, and potentially how we might apply it to businesses here in the U.S. And so as a result, met some folks at a company called Sportradar, which is the company that kind of gathers and then distributes a lot of the official betting data for, once again, a lot of the big sports leagues, and then gets that data to the FanDuels and DraftKings and Bet365s and all the other operators. And so that really got me more of a background in kind of the data and sports betting data. And after that, got a reach out completely out of the blue about this role at Equibase. Had always been a fan of horse racing, had grown up going to the races in Arkansas at Oaklawn, and felt like, hey, this is a real opportunity to come work on something both that I really enjoy and something I think I can have a real impact on, right? I feel like that from a data collection and presentation standpoint, that in some respects horse racing is not where it needs to be. And so I really felt like that there was an opportunity to come here and move some things forward and hopefully have a real impact on the sport. And so far, so good. Lots of work to do, but it's been a lot of fun.
So that brings us to the Equibase business model and operations. So you guys work with 100+ independent racetracks, and Equibase, as I understand it, was founded in 1990?
That's correct.
By the Jockey Club and the Thoroughbred Racing Association of North America to standardize the data before it was scattered and not standardized.
It was primarily collected by the Daily Racing Forum, which was a private entity. And I think there was a realization by some people at the industry at the time that, as an industry, we really need to take control of the data. So I would say, so while we are, absolutely run this as a business, in a lot of ways, we are really kind of a utility in kind of some of the, sort of underlying infrastructure of the industry. And so, that leads us to make some decisions maybe differently than if you were just running, a complete sort of for-profit business and looking to make the absolute most money possible. We have a little bit broader mission than that. And so we have to run a responsible business, but at the same time, make sure we're doing the right things for the industry.
Because the Thoroughbred Racing Association of North America, that's a nonprofit. Is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Yes. So,
yeah. And obviously all the tracks are for-profit entities,
yeah. But they represent the
But that's the association that represents the tracks.
So that brings me to the question of ownership of data, because you work for the association, or not you, your company works for the association that represents all the racetracks. But you'd say you mutually benefit from your partnership with these racetracks. So how does the data ownership work? Because your company collects the data, but you also have to sell the data back to the tracks so they can utilize it. Is that correct? And
that's right.
How does that part of the business model work?
So, essentially, we are, as we collect the data, and, one of the sort of key things to know about data is, a fact is a fact and is not copyrightable. What is copyrightable and sort of what we do own is how the data is structured and how it's delivered, and really, what we've created out of the data. And so, we work with the tracks to, the idea like a lot of these sort of consortiums of a number of different things, you have to figure out how do you sort of equally divide the costs. And so, or equitably divide the costs, I guess is the right way to say it. Okay. And so, originally everything was based on program sales. So you go to the races because that was really the primary source of revenue from the Equibase data. I think over 90% was you would go to the racetrack, you would buy a program to see the races for the day and how all the horses had previously done in the races leading up to this day. And that's how you would make your betting decisions. And so selling those programs was the vast majority of revenue that was generated by Equibase. You look at it today, and that's a very small percentage. Now the vast majority of the revenue that we generate is actually by selling the data to other people who create derivative products, to the businesses like the advanced deposit wagering, sites that take your bet if you want to bet online on the races, or and then we also sell a lot of our data outside the U.S. So for people in the U.K. or France or wherever else who are betting on American horse racing, we supply a lot of the data for that. And so, but what happens then is that these ownership units are kind of based on program sales, and then we pay a dividend back out to the tracks based on what their percentage of ownership is. And so it's really a way for us to, run a good business, but then be able to, distribute the profits back out to the industry. And then the Jockey Club, also gets a piece of the dividend, which is then used to reinvest into different initiatives that the Jockey Club supports.
Yeah. So with that being said, obviously this is, to me, and maybe to other viewers who might listen to this, who are still kind of confused on how Equibase operates, it seems like there's going to be a lot of state laws, regulatory environments that kind of dictate this, especially when it comes to distributing royalties and whatnot. How do these dictate certain aspects of contracts, and how do these state laws and regulatory environments affect Equibase?
The good news from our perspective is that, we're really just collecting the data, and how we collect the data, whether it's in California or Kentucky or New York or Florida, it's all the same, right? And so, we have a group of employees called chart callers that are essentially the official scorers for every race. And then that's the data that then turns into the past performances that you see in the program or daily racing form or whatever else. And so we have those people at the tracks. We have people who do it here centrally in Lexington, depending on the situation. And, that data gets collected and then distributed out. Where the regulatory overlay really comes in is, from a betting perspective, and some of our customers who are the the wagering platforms, they obviously have to be very very thoughtful about different state regulations and how they're operating. And so we obviously sort of work with them, to the greatest extent that we can to make sure that we're getting them what they need so they can run their business. But, thankfully for me, I don't have to spend as much time, concerned with that as some other sectors of the industry do.
Yeah. So this next part, and this is kind of what we talked about with the modernization of horse racing. And, you've spent a lot of time already trying to help horse racing succeed. And we know from looking it up, just some closures of horse tracks that just couldn't make it and kind of jump into the modern era. For example, Golden Gate Fields in 2024. How has Equibase adapted to these shifts? And how would you prevent this from happening in the future, or have you already taken steps to kind of help tracks in a way?
Yeah, so I think, what we're focused on is how do we make racing as entertaining as possible and generate new fans, right? At the end of the day, if you've got people interested in your product and people betting on your product, it'll continue to grow. If you look back, several years ago, horse racing was really the only type of betting that you could do in the U.S., outside of Las Vegas, right? And so, as other types of betting have come online in different states, and whether it's, casinos or now, the proliferation of sports betting, all that has pulled betting dollars away from horse racing, which has certainly made it, a more challenging, proposition to run one of these tracks. I think the other challenge is, you've obviously got, some tracks like Golden Gate Fields, for example, sits on some pretty expensive real estate. And so, the people make business decisions around things there. And so, but it's all sort of, it's all sort of a constant evolution. And, I think our role in making sure that racing continues to expand and tracks continue to, thrive and are able to operate efficiently is really about how do we make the sport more entertaining and bring in new fans. It was when we were at the Econ Games, somebody made the remark when we were looking at some of the past performances, well, it looks like a tax document, and so it's hard to get anybody all that excited, even though you are the CPA, it's hard to get people terribly excited about, doing taxes. And so I think one of the key things that we want to think about is how do we modernize how people look at data, and conform it with how people think about sports betting, and if you're betting on the NBA, and what are the things you take into account. How do we make sure that we're providing some of those same things so that it's easy to make that transition over? One of the great things about horse racing, aside from sort of the great experience of actually being at the races, is that as a wagering product, it's 364 days a year. No racing on Christmas, but and it's a lot of it happens during the day as well, when there are not necessarily a lot of other sporting events going on. And so those are some of the things I think we need to lean into and figure out how to capitalize.
So you mentioned making sure that horse racing is entertainment. So you are trying to combine data with entertainment. So like the NBA, they have triple-double stats. They have stats that fans get excited about, that they specifically track, not necessarily for betting, but just to have stats about their favorite players. Like Stephen Curry, he had 20 three-pointers the other night, or certain things like that. And one of the things we were talking about that's different specifically for horse races and horse racing is that, like, I'm a Warriors fan. I'm from the Bay Area. So Stephen Curry, the Splash Brothers, I used to watch them all the time growing up. And that loyal fan base to a local team. Horse racing is different. You don't necessarily have a team to root for no matter what, because there are fans who really hang in there with teams that don't necessarily do all that well. So
rooting for the laundry, as we say.
Yeah, you have like high turnover with specific race horses. I believe the average race horse time frame is 2 to 3 years.
So horses will start racing in their 2-year-old year.
Mm-hmm.
The horses that you'll see in the Kentucky Derby are 3 years old. And so what happens with a lot of the best horses is after their 3-year-old year, if they've had a good amount of success, then they're going to make a lot more money on the breeding farm than they're going to probably make on the track. Mm-hmm. And so it's the wise business decision to retire that horse and start their breeding career and have horses to sell further on down the line. And so one of the things that we're trying to do and that we launched recently is a ratings project, which basically hopefully puts us in a position to put more horses together in similar fields, but not have to risk losing your horse in a claiming race. And so one of the challenges is, as a horse, is maybe on the lower end of the performance scale, they end up in claiming races. And that's a way to make sure that you get equal races, because if all these horses are essentially for sale at the end of this race for $50,000, then you're going to get a lot of horses that are kind of worth that and hypothetically should run the same.
Can you explain what claiming races are for those who don't?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a claiming race is basically a race, and it's a way to group horses together, and it's based on what an owner would be willing to sell that horse for. Okay. And so if you and I both have horses and we want to run them in a $20,000 claiming race, then Jackson can put a slip in and say, I'm going to buy that horse at the end of the race. And so, but, multiple people can as well. And so at the end of the day, if, multiple people have put in a claim for a horse, they do a shake at the end, and whoever gets pulled out is the person who gets the horse. And so, but that's it's just a way to sort of enforce a level of where horses can race and make sure it's a competitive race, so like horses are racing together. What we've done is introduce this rating system, so it actually gives an opportunity for racing offices to write races where horses are going to be competitive, but you're not using that claiming mechanism, so then you can keep the horse. So if there's a horse that either it's just one that you've fallen in love with as an owner and you just wouldn't want to risk giving it away, or if it's a horse that maybe has a lot of residual breeding value in the shed, so a filly that is you expect to be a really good mare at some point, you may not want to lose that horse, but you may be able to race it 3 or 4 more times. But that is definitely one of the challenges that we have is a lot of our best horses only race through their 2, 3, 4-year-old years, and then maybe are retired. And so to figure out how to keep those horses in longer is certainly important for the for the sport and the longevity. But I think also looking at things like how do we get people to know the trainers and the jockeys and owners better, and really, start to pull for those rather than an individual horse. Just because, even the nature of, even when these horses are running, it's typical that, they'll take some time off, after a period of races. And then even when they're actively racing, they may just race once a month. And so it's really hard to just, it's not like you can follow the same horse every week, right? And so that's another one of the dynamics that we sort of deal with and think about when we're trying to think about ways to present the data, present the sport, and make the sport more popular.
So it's kind of like a speed figure, but for overall performance that people evaluate?
That's exactly right. So we create a speed figure here called the Equibase speed figure, and that's an indication of what a horse did in a particular race on that particular day, with some adjustments based on how a track may be running versus how it runs on other days, right? So that's what the speed figure is. And then the rating is really more the body of the horse's work.
Okay. So, Jackson?
Yeah, I kind of just wanted to get into, I know I'm very interested, and maybe some other people are, and this definitely ties into your career with ESPN, Fox Sports, what have you. How does horse racing really compare to other sports that people watch and have come to love, and how has it developed over the years too? An NBA team will have, I think it's 84 games in a year. I know it's over 80, and that's all they get before playoffs begin. Horse racing only has, you might have this horse one race in this year. That could be all he does. How does this kind of compare to other sports?
It does make it, harder to follow, I think, and I think that's a real problem for us to solve. What I would say though is, as far as sports, like when you go to the racetrack, like how close you are to the action. How accessible a lot of the owners and trainers are. One of the great things that, over here at Keeneland, they just opened up a new building, and one of the areas that you can buy tickets in, the jockeys walk through before every race, and so you're like up close to the jockeys, and, you go to Saratoga and the jockeys come off the track and they walk, right through the crowd, back to where they're going to, change into their next silks and get ready to go for the next race. But, they're stopping and taking pictures with kids and taking pictures with, getting autographs and everything else. And so it's really neat to see. And it's just, there are a lot of really relatable people in this sport, which I think, sets it apart a little bit from, it's, if you're a huge, baseball fan or NBA fan or whatever the case may be, it's pretty hard to get up close and really, feel like you're a part of the action.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I'm a big Cardinals fan, close to the St. Louis area, and I've had a handful of times I've had an opportunity to get closer to the field, but not often. I think that's a cool thing that Keeneland's doing, especially. So with that, how's this business model different? You've kind of explained this a little bit from these big organizations. And just kind of, what direction are you leaning towards in the data collection? Do you want to get more specific? Do you want to get down to the nitty gritty, like we said, those exciting stats? Is that something that you think these horse tracks are looking for?
I think that's a part of it. I think the other thing that we've put a tremendous amount of investment in is our GPS technology, where we have GPS trackers that are on all of the horses, or at least it's at most of the top tracks. So we were at 32 tracks right now, but we have GPS transponders in the saddle towels of the horse. And we're able to really get an accurate picture of how the horse is moving around the entire track. And so, those are the types of things where you can really tell the story of what happened in a race. And so we've created a lot of new graphics packages. The big track up in Toronto, Woodbine, just have started in their most recent meet using a lot of these GPS graphics. So at the end of the race, you can say which horse had the top speed, which horse had the fastest acceleration out of the gate, which horse was going the fastest during the final furlong. So, a furlong is an eighth of a mile. So 8 furlongs to a mile. And one of the things we do with the GPS data is break it down by the half furlong, so you can really see, how that horse has moved around the track versus the old kind of style of data collection where you sort of collect data at 4 points and you're only collecting the data really for the lead horse rather than seeing, what all 12 horses may be doing. So those are all, some of the things that we're doing, and the graphics we can build out of that, the visualization tools we can build out of that, we think will be pretty impactful.
Well, at the Econ Games, a lot of the teams in the final round and even in the preliminary round came up with some really cool graphics to track the horses during the race, like color-coded graphics like that. And one of the teams mentioned that it is kind of hard to see where your horse is at times when you're watching the race, so that could help fans really keep track.
Absolutely.
And when we were talking in your office hours at the Econ Games, you mentioned wanting to create more rivalries within the horse racing industry. How do you guys anticipate trying to build that sense of this is a really good race and we don't know who's going to win, and it might be between these two horses, it might be between these two horses? It sounds like that data you're collecting with GPS will help you create those stats that really stand out, that create that exciting atmosphere around.
And it gives different fans a different way to look at it, right? I think it, even among people who are sort of expert handicappers, and I've gotten to know a lot of people in this role who are really, really good. But even the people who are really, really good don't always agree. As a matter of fact, they typically don't agree. And so, everybody, depending on, their style and how they look at a race and how they think about a race, may end up on some, may end up with a different point of view. And so the more data that we can feed into that, and obviously there are people creating computer models and, using AI and looking at it a lot of different ways, are forming different opinions. And so those different opinions are what makes it interesting to talk about a sport, right?
That's all part of the fun, though. I can't tell you how many times me and my brother have argued back and forth about who's the GOAT in the NBA. I think it's Steph Curry. I'm probably biased, but he thinks it's LeBron James.
Steph Curry is a really likable guy.
He is. He's so exciting to watch, too. Lost my train of thought. Sorry.
It must be all the Steph Curry talk.
I'm getting sidetracked. I'm having flashbacks. I have the 2015 championship. I got to go to a game. I was so into it. It was great. Sorry. Luke had mentioned in the car ride over here about the importance of being able to sell merchandise. So with these, I have Splash Brothers merchandise and 2015 championship stuff, and we were talking about golf and how that's a big part of their business model. So the main thing that comes to mind is Secretariat, and one of the teams actually came up with an AI help tool that was named Secretariat, which was really cool. And do you plan on, which that's data, you guys are data, it's separate from those kinds of things, but having more exciting data could definitely lead to merchandising opportunities. So what do you see opportunities like that for Equibase?
So one of the most interesting things that I think that came out of the Econ Games, there were a number of teams that came up with the concept of essentially like Pokemon cards, right, for horses, right, and talking about their personalities and their stats, and to me that's a fantastic way to get to know them. There's a Cy Games has produced a game in Japan that's gotten incredibly popular. Where people are showing up dressed as these anime horse characters at races, and it's fantastic. But it's like, this is how a new generation sort of consumes content and thinks about these things. And so as an industry, these are things we've got to be thinking about. I think I've been fortunate enough to get to go to some races in Asia and Japan and Hong Kong, and you look at one, they have incredible crowds, and then you also the merchandise that's available. Japan has lots of plushies, little stuffed animals for a lot of their most famous horses, which are really cool, and it gives people a new way to connect. And I do think you're right, the merchandise makes a real difference.
Yeah. So here I kind of want to get into a little bit more leadership specific. So have there been any key changes at Equibase that you've kind of put forward since stepping in the COO role in 2023? And more specifically, have you kind of based it off of things ESPN has done, especially your early career starting in there? I know like NASCAR really took a step into the future, early 2000s, right around that time, where instead of having one person on each individual car tracking almost like points of call in a horse race, where they're tracking the speed at this point in the track, now they have every single moment that car is on the track, they have its speed, they have it ready, and that's really helped them leap into a modern era. Have those been some kind of things you base it off of, like ABS and MLB, how they have this automatic system now? Is that something?
100%. It's funny that you bring up, the NASCAR kind of timing and scoring, because that was something that I worked sort of directly with the team on that, and there were a couple of races called the Gatorade Duels, which were basically qualifying races for the Daytona 500. And NASCAR is a little bit upside down in that they start their year with their biggest event rather than sort of finishing the year with the biggest event. But back when I was working on it, those two races weren't televised, and so the only way to see what was going on with those races was the timing and scoring that we had on NASCAR.com. And so it was, early days of the internet, and we would, always have technical problems, and it was the most stressful day of the year by far. And I still have kind of, I'm kind of sitting here sweating thinking about it. But I was always relieved when we made it through and it all worked okay. But, really, thinking about like, how do we do a better job gathering data? I actually spoke with a friend of mine recently that I've worked with at Major League Baseball about their data collection. I said, hey, if you were doing this differently, like what would, if you're starting over from scratch, like, what would you do differently and how would you think about it? And he said the one thing would be I would do a lot more remote data collection. And so that's actually, something that we've been working on here. So instead of having people out at every track, we're able to actually do as good of a job, and in some cases a better job, collecting the data centrally here in Lexington off of video and using our GPS data. And so that's really made a difference. And it's been, frankly, it was one of the things that people had said, well, you're never going to be able to do that. And, here we are, and we're actually doing it on a regular basis and really happy with how it's working out.
So one of the challenges with that, particularly for horse racing, is that the tracks are different distances. You have dirt tracks, you have
turf tracks, synthetic tracks.
Yes. So with a basketball court, it's the same size court. With NFL, it's going to be the same size, not stadium, but field. Yes, field. So that seems to be kind of the challenge for your data collection. There are so many variations to.
Not only are there lots of variations, but it's just such a huge facility, right? And so, if you're looking at a basketball arena or a football field, there are a lot of technologies you can use that just aren't going to work on a racetrack that's a mile around. And, you think about the cost of, and this is where GPS has been such an improvement too, over the traditional beam timing, is that you don't have to necessarily have all the wiring in place all the way around the track, right? So it's a wireless system. And so that's made a pretty significant difference. The other thing too is these are chaotic environments, right? And so there are lawnmowers, tractors, horses, right? And, we've even had issues where we have a timing eye and, a bunch of bees have decided to nest in there, right? And so, we have to send somebody out to go take care of it. But, at Fairgrounds, which is the racetrack in New Orleans, is also where the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival is held every year. Well, you can imagine that most of our equipment, may not come out of that, the same way that it went into it, right? And so those are just some of the crazy variables that come up that you're not necessarily planning on dealing with, but you've got to figure out how to deal with them.
Yeah, that was kind of part of my question was, having to deal with the horses it's different every single day. They're never going to be the same mood one day. They may race different because of that. So I'm glad you kind of got into the chaotic nature of horse racing. more specifically with your leadership at the company, how has that changed from predecessors in your role? I don't know if you've had a lot of contact with anybody that's there, or if it's been somebody stepped down and you've just taken that role.
I was just on the phone earlier today with one of my predecessors. So he's doing some other things in racing and potentially can help us out, which is great to speak to someone who's already been in the same role, because they're that they kind of understand all the challenges and the nuance that maybe take some time for someone else to pick up. But no, I've actually got a good relationship with several of the people who have held this role before me. I would say it was funny. One of the guys that worked for me, we were at a horse racing event, and his wife was there and talking to my wife and said, when Kyle started, he was like, I can't believe they've hired someone from outside of the industry. And I'll tell you, it's a horse racing. I think one of the other challenges we have, it's a fantastic sport because it's so complicated and there's so many different aspects to it. But at the same time, it's a really steep learning curve. And so it's as a new fan, it's kind of hard to get your head around all the different things that are happening. And so, a lot of times I think racing becomes pretty insular. And so I feel like that, the time that I've spent in other organizations has really kind of helped me bring some things that are complementary to some of the things that are going on here. At the same time, I have a number of people on the team who, have spent time, working on, the backside and, training horses. And, those people are really invaluable to me to help educate me and fill in the gaps in my knowledge. And so it's a good it's a good team dynamic, and it's a lot of fun to have people you can rely on that are always going to have the answer you need.
We learned that it was a steep learning curve at the Econ Games. we prepared, but it was a lot to download.
I learned something new every day.
Yeah. So from the Econ Games, there was a lot of really exciting things that came out of that. I mean, I know our team was so impressed by what the different the different schools came up with. Berea College, I believe, is who won, and they had a whole website developed and different products of tracking the horses around that racetrack using the GPS data. And for those who don't know, the GPS data, the edge it gives the Equibase is that before they only tracked the section leaders. So you couldn't track the speed at which the other horses in the race cross different section lines. So the GPS data gives them data on every single horse throughout the entire race, which is really, really cool. And so I wanted to ask, what innovations are you planning on utilizing from the competition, and what ideas were kind of out of left field that you never thought you would hear?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of like I said earlier, kind of a lot of the things around sort of the horses' personalities and sort of merchandise and cards and things like that, I didn't expect to see as much of that. I thought it would be much more around just data visualization and maybe better ways to pick a winner or place a bet or whatever else. So I was really happy to see, some things that I think we can utilize from a fan development, kind of fan engagement standpoint. Berea College was who we picked as the winner of the competition, but I'll tell you, it was really really impossible to pick a winner. I mean, I think there are a big number of the teams that could have been selected winners and would have been very defensible as winners. But I think Berea, I think maybe just the overall comprehensiveness of their presentation and how they were able to articulate it and deliver it is probably what gave them the edge. But I'll tell you, it was a lot of great ideas and a lot of fun to kind of see what people could come up with.
Yeah, I know we were absolutely blown away. I mean, we walked into the finals and they were the first presentation, and wouldn't you know, they ended up winning. And we had, I'd say, some comparable ideas. We didn't have everything they did, obviously. We were just blown away by the web development skills, the visualization skills. I feel like that's something we personally lacked, but seeing that is just wow. Somebody came up with that in 24 hours. It was really awesome competition.
Yeah, those just the overall level of quality of work and the creativity of the ideas, and honestly, just when we were doing office hours and some of the other conversations we had, just so many like great questions and, just a lot of interest and energy and enthusiasm, which is great to see. And, we're hopeful that we can bring some of those students, into a career in horse racing and hopefully help us continue to move things forward.
I've definitely been paying more attention since our competition last month in March. This is your first time sponsoring the Econ Games. Is there anything going into it that you would have changed, maybe about the prompt or the presentation, or anything about sponsoring it that you would change that maybe would have gotten better results or different results, that you would go about it differently?
I think whether it's good or bad, the prompt that we gave was fairly broad. I feel like we probably would have gotten a different set of results if we would have given a more specific prompt. At the same time, I feel like having the students have enough room to utilize their creativity and think about how they want to use it. So use the data. I was really pretty happy with what I saw, and actually just caught up with Dr. Patel just a couple days ago on some of his students, just to do a bit of a recap and debrief. And I think we all came away feeling really good about how it played out. And I know I also really enjoyed Bank of America, who was the title sponsor. I thought when they outlined some of the career opportunities they have, and some of the work that they do around data analysis and security, it really gets your gears turning. Thinking about what all's out there and what all's possible.
And before we wrap up with our last question, I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to include that maybe people don't know about the horse racing industry, or just about your career that maybe you want to share.
What I would say is that you really, if you get close to this industry, you can't not love it. It really is just, from the farms and the folds and the sales and the auctions, which are really fascinating to watch, and all the different dynamics there and all the personalities involved in racing. It's just, like I say, it's a steep learning curve, but once you get to know it, it really is a great sport. And I'm hoping that we can, use data and use our platforms to introduce more people to it.
Yeah. I know, like you said, getting ready for the Kentucky Derby, that's probably the next biggest race that'd go on.
No doubt about it.
I myself have been to Churchill Downs. Took a trip to Louisville and was fortunate enough to get to go in, get a quick tour, a little bit of history of the track, and that was completely new to me. Had never really been around horse tracks before. That being said, what other events and races should fans be looking to? I mean, like, what's really going on in the horse racing world?
No, that's a really, really good question, Jackson. I think, there's become so much focus on our very biggest days, right? And so obviously, you've got the Kentucky Derby, which, and I've been fortunate enough to go a few times, and man, the electricity in that place, just before the race goes off is really something else. And so that's obviously, sort of the crown jewel of marquee event. Then you sort of move on to the other Triple Crown races, the Preakness 2 weeks later, and then the Belmont up in New York, which they've got a brand new facility that it won't be in this year, but next year. And so that's really exciting to see. But then, you move into the summertime racing, and, up in Saratoga, there's lots of fantastic racing. It's such a great experience and so different. I think that's one of the fun things about all these racetracks have their own personalities, right? And so to be able to visit a lot of the different ones and sort of see the different dynamics. But the other, to your question, the other thing that I think we need to think about as a sport is how do we, beyond the Triple Crown and those 3 races and the Breeders' Cup in November, which is obviously another huge event for us, is, how do we make sure that we have a steady cadence of events that if you're a casual fan, it makes it easy to pay attention to the races and get to know the horses and get to know the personalities.
So, last question. We're college students. I know me and Jackson are graduating next year. And what advice would you have for students just coming out of college, starting their career? What would you have to say to students just graduating?
Yeah, so look, I think the one thing I would say is stay on top of the latest technology, right? And I think, one of the things that you really can bring to an organization as someone who's right out of college is really, how do people in your generation interact with sports, interact with content, right? And so, that's one of a constant question. I have a couple of kids who are about the same age as you guys, and so I'm all the time asking them about how do what do they think of this? How do they get this information? How do they find their news? How do they what sports do they care about? What sports do their friends care about? And so really to be able to bring that perspective of what people in your age group are interested in is really, really valuable. I think the other thing that's really valuable is just making sure that, as I said, you're staying up on top of the latest technology. I would always, make the splurge and invest in, whatever the latest devices is, whether it's a phone or, whatever else, right? And because, people, it gives you the people the perception that you're on top of those things and interested in them. And the other is people ask you questions about them. It gives you opportunity to talk about things. And, what I would suggest too is don't hesitate to interact with the people that you're working for and, more senior people in the organization. I think a lot of times they're really interested to hear, what your opinions are and how they can apply it to their business.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. And that's a wrap on our first episode of the Economics Club podcast.